Here's another movie night with...
Coryphaeus.
Yes, Coryphaeus. Hey guys, this is DeathGroundReviews, and you can probably tell from how I started this that the movie we watched was The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall. And, yeah, you want to hit us off with a summary?
Okay, well, I'm sure everyone knows The Shining. It was directed and produced by Stanley Kubrick, loosely based on Stephen King's The Shining. Came out in 1980 and is about an aspiring writer and recovering alcoholic who gets into a position to take care of the Overlook Hotel, which turns out to be haunted of sorts.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of, I guess, debatable.
Within the movie haunted, I think. Within the book, it's a little different, but...
Yeah, well, in the book, to me, it seemed more apparent that it was haunted, or at least that the boy's shining abilities unlocked that. In the movie, it seemed like Kubrick... From stories I've heard, it seemed like Kubrick was in conflict with that. Here's a funny story, in fact. One time he called up Stephen King at like 7 in the morning and asked King, says, "Do you believe in God?" King's like, yeah. And he had said something, he brought up something about it being a positive direction in the movie to test the possibility of an afterlife. And King's like, well, what if it's hell? He says, "I don't believe in hell." Hung up on him or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. It seems like it could either be madness or yes, ghosts. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah, it does kind of present an interesting, but that kind of gets into some of the differences between the book and the movie, which is probably worth going through. The movie is obviously a very well-known, well-received. If I remember correctly, it was number 65 on a list of
like great horror films or something.
Of top-rated movies.
Was it for that year or all time?
I don't know. This is just on the IMDb top-rated movies.
And you know what?
And it looks like it just goes through quite a bit of different time periods. So all the way down to, I've seen 1942s. So yeah, very, very well received. Very well received.
I know Stephen King hated it. The way he describes it, he says, the book was hot and the movie was cold. And King, another metaphor King gives for it, he says, the movie was a lot like a beautiful Cadillac, but without an engine in it. A beautiful Cadillac on display, but without an engine.
I think it was an interesting thing because of the different approaches that King used towards his book versus Stanley Kubrick. And that it is kind of an interesting... I think The Shining's one of those situations where you really see... Because a lot of times when you see a movie done from a book, I mean, you walk in and you're like, okay, this is not the book. If you're walking into a movie expecting the book, you're always going to be disappointed. And so even with really great adaptations like The Lord of the Rings or things like that, you're really... The best you can hope for is that you're going to get a good interpretation.
Right.
Whereas, like with Lord of the Rings, it's a very true interpretation to Tolkien. Kubrick goes in his own direction. Oh, yeah. And that's just what Kubrick always did. Always was in his own direction. Always in his own thing. And it's very interesting to see the story raised through Kubrick's eyes. And to go through The Shining, it was talking a story about Kubrick going through horror novels, and his assistant was like, she could just hear books slamming against the wall.
because he
every
hated it
time
so
he
much,
hated that he would get the and just like no, and he would just throw it, and he was getting no, throw it.
It's like Nicholson with his axe banging through the halls, right?
And and then when it was silent for a while, she kind of got nervous and walked in, and he was engrossed in The Shining. And so whatever was going on in The Shining really clicked with him. But it's one of those interesting things of once the author lets it out into the world, how does the audience take it?
Right.
And I think there's no greater example of how sometimes the audience takes it in a different way as looking at Stephen King's vision of The Shining versus Kubrick's.
Yeah.
I mean, Kubrick always just he was a mind unto himself. I think no one they talk about in there how Shelley Duvall actually became physically ill because Kubrick was just going crazy. Like he was changing the scenes on a day-to-day basis. Jack Nicholson started just throwing away the scripts that the production assistants would give him because he's like, they're just going to change. And so he would literally memorize his lines right before they would go on because sometimes that was the first time he had the actual lines.
Which probably made for some good improv moves, right?
You know, when we were watching it, I was just thinking, because I was sitting there watching Shelley Duvall, because it's been a few years since I've watched The Shining. And I'm watching her, and I'm like, she looks almost skeletal in some of those scenes.
Oh, yeah.
Like, she looks sick. I was like, wow, I wonder what the... nope, she was really sick. But some of those scenes, like the scenes in the bar, was an 11, almost 12-hour shoot. Can you imagine that kind of shoot, just sitting there talking back and forth with the guy? But, I mean, beautifully.
Well done scene.
Beautifully.
Yeah.
I
kind of wonder, just, there's those scenes where they're panning through hallways and it's the maze, like getting lost deep into a maze quality. I wonder if that was like the element of going into madness that maybe Kubrick derived from the book and translated to the visual form, perhaps.
Yeah, he really, I mean, all of the sets were designed on a series of sound stages. Even some of the exterior shots were all soundstage. And so Kubrick was such a meticulous director that almost every shot there you can walk into the movie, and this actually gets into something that's probably worth discussing later in the thing of the conspiracies that people have surrounding Kubrick's films. But every single part of it has some meaning to Kubrick. And you can argue that just by the way Kubrick does stuff. So whenever you see anything, the maze quality of the trees as they come in, and the strange angular designs.
I mean, even the floor design was a maze. A pattern going on there that you could get lost in the repetition of it. It's like madness, you know, repeating something over and over again.
And as the kid's just, rushing around on his little bike and he's going.
It's like they're possessed.
Yeah. But it's always this pointless circle of
Torrance
lost.
Throwing the ball in the hallway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whatever else, I mean, it had to have been horrific for everyone doing it when trying to put up with this madness, but it really, say what you want, it brought out one of the most raw performances that you will see from people like Jack Nicholson. It's just
some of my favorite moments, or the most disturbing moments for me in the film, are the moments where they have the long shots of just Nicholson staring at something. Now that right there, I mean, he does great with his lines. He's very animated with his lines, but just the acting skill in those scenes, like the one where the lady's coming out of the bathtub, and he, that sinister, mischievous grin just kind of grows on his face gradually. That was a very just great acting there. So convincing, you know?
You know, it's funny. Jack Nicholson was Kubrick's very first choice for Jack Torrance. Obviously, brilliant choice.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Some of the other actors that were being considered included Robert De Niro. I can't see him doing as well, but at least I can see why he was in the running, right? Uh-huh. Harrison Ford, sorry.
No.
But this one made me... Robin Williams.
That would have been... See, people, we need a deep fake. We need a deep fake of Robin Williams playing the role. Some other YouTuber, do it, please.
You know there's someone out there that's like, wait a minute.
Yeah, right?
But those films that you watch and you're like, had you had... No, sorry, Nicholson is the only actor I could think of who could pull that off.
It best. You're right.
He just looks so...
He looks like a werewolf in the making in that film.
He does, and we even talked about it as we were watching it. You watched him go from kind of this, okay, I'm a little stressed maybe, or I'm
on edge. Was the term you used that I liked. He looked on edge.
Yeah. To slowly turning into a monster.
Yeah.
Until by the very end, when he's chasing... Spoilers, guys. If you haven't watched this,
especially horror fans, shame on you.
Yeah, really. I mean, if you're not a horror fan, you're like, wait a minute. Well, fine, but this is a great film. You should just watch anyways. But if you're a horror fan, sorry, this is required. This is like in the classroom of horror. This is probably a 101.
Oh yeah,
film.
The fundamentals, baby.
So he really does. He's seen the little boy through the maze, and it's not even words anymore. It's just howling. This howl,
this raspy howl. Yeah,
it completely transforms him into the only actor I can think of that could pull that off in that time period, right off the top of my head. Some of you film half a dozen people, but for me, I'm sitting there listening to him. He can pull off that madness. I mean, he looks half crazy as it is. Let's be honest. That's just Jack Nicholson's look. He just looks half insane.
Right.
But he's an amazing actor.
No, he is. Yeah, there were a few scenes early on in the movie where some of that on edge for me didn't work. Like there was the Ullman interview where he kept shifting in his chair, and then he would put this little grin on that I kept imagining this mad giggle of every time he did it, and it didn't work for me. But no, as the film progressed, and there were some lines that were kind of corny for me, like when he said, they were showing him the children's quarters, and he's all, it sure looks homey, perfect for a child. For some reason that just didn't work for me. It was stilted or something. I don't know. I'm no actor, though. I don't know what I'm saying, but
I think just given what he was doing, he was on edge because of what, and it really is one of those things that it makes more sense looking backwards than forwards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you're sitting there watching the movie, and you're a few steps in, and you start to see why he's stressed out about people and stressed out about this whole situation. And so when you're just watching it the first time, it feels off.
Yeah. And I guess that makes sense, though, right? It does make sense from terms of what's going on in the character.
And so it's one of those... And that's the thing about Kubrick's films is there's no spoon feeding you. I mean, he expects you to walk in.
It's pretty blunt.
And be a part of the film. And like, hey, you remember this and you go through that and these things go together.
Oh, you know who else was great? Scatman Crothers. Halloran. He did a good job. He did a good job in the film.
Well, and that's the thing, because you think about the core cast.
Yeah.
And really it's a very small... It's a very small cast. It has to be, because it's kind of that weird madness.
Right. Well, one part I liked with Scatman Crothers, I might be pronouncing his name wrong, sorry guys, but he played Dick Halloran. I really loved the scene when he's enumerating all of the foodstuffs in the hotel, and he has this sort of not poetic, but a rhythm to it as he's saying it. And some people would claim, oh, that's stereotypical of a black person. I disagree. I kind of thought it worked well because he's kind of selling the place to him, and he wants sort of an upbeat rhythm as he speaks. And I thought he depicted that well. I liked it.
Well, you know, and it was one of those situations where the way he presents himself to the mom versus the way he presents himself to the boy.
Good point.
To the mom, he's the salesman, you know, and it's like, hey, we got this and we got this, and it's just this beautiful, and it's the kind of, he presents himself as the kind of person you can automatically be warmed up to, right? He's smiling, he's happy, he's just excited, he wants to share what's going on, and he's just trying to make her feel at ease, and you feel at ease. Then you get with the boy, and it changes because now he can't hide from the boy. Yep. Because he realizes that the boy shines.
Right.
And even though he tries, and I love it because even during the film, you said that when it's like, when the little boy says, "Are you afraid?" And you just see him, he says no. But everything he does says, I am lying.
His demeanor and his expression is lie.
Yeah, and that switch between how he presented himself with the boy versus the mom is just, it changes it from, oh, he's just kind of being him, to he knows exactly what the crap's going on here. and it shows him as an actor in that thing, in that moment, and the way he's able to shift from that, you know, I'm the cook, I'm selling the hotel, to boy, let's be real, I gotta
sells facades off. This is me and you.
And then when it presents, and there's so many little things, and this is where Kubrick's artistic thing really comes in. It shows him when he gets that shine from the boy. And he's in Miami. And the whole scene around him is dark blue. Except a single shining light right behind him. And you're just like, bravo, Kubrick. That's...
I remember you bringing that up in the movie when we watched it. And I never noticed it in the past. I never thought about it, but...
Well, and that's the beauty of it with films. There are certain directors, and they are somewhat experimental. They're often found within like horror or mystery, sometimes even comedy, where they're so experimental that as you start watching through it, you can't help. Every time you watch it, you're like, dang you, I missed that. And right off the top of my head, I would say, the other one that I would think of is Alfred Hitchcock. Oh. Alfred Hitchcock was so, even with his actors, he would keep them in suspense. He would mess with their heads. He would purposely do things to mess with the actors' heads to get them to act in that. And Kubrick was just naturally kind of weird. And so it worked for his favor. Whether he was conscious or unconscious of doing it, I think people might debate. Someone who knows more might be able to mention it. But his way of doing that and the artistic notes that he puts into things really does change his film work.
Yes.
And so when you watch it, that's what's fun. And that's what leads to all the people having like the scene that has the Apollo sweater. They're like, see, it's the moon landing. He's talking about faking the moon land. Because Kubrick choreographed and set up every single scene so intensely that you start wondering what's the meaning behind everything.
Right. It banters to you to interpret.
Yeah. And he did. He questioned a lot of things. I mean, he just had lots of questions about life, and he wasn't someone who trusted people right off the bat. So it was fun. But there was just scenes like that. You could look at the person's face, and this is where he got the right actors, whether it's Jack Nicholson or Shelley Duvall, who actually was actually nominated as the worst actress for this movie, which I guess I see it. She's a little bit of she's a bit of a pain, but that's the character.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's kind of hard to give her that crap. She acts like the character is.
That's how it came across to me. That it was just befitting to the extreme stress she was in.
Yeah.
You know, walled up in this hotel with a husband going crazy and a child getting hurt.
Yeah, and she's trying to make something work that she obviously has questions about, this marriage.
Right.
And what she's doing is put on that bright smiling face.
Right.
And try to make things happen.
Well, it's cracking.
Yeah.
You see it cracking, that smiling facade, you know. And, you know, she's smoking cigarette after cigarette. You're going to feel wired.
Yeah. And
from all of that.
And so I think she actually did a really great job. But I think that's the beauty of it. All the actors really bring...
It was different than King's novel, obviously. Wendy in the novel was more tougher, I guess, resourceful. In the end, she did hesitate at first, and then kind of grows a backbone later.
Well, you know, I think there's something of a difference here. King didn't have a father.
Uh-huh.
And so if people notice, a lot of the women that he kind of did, they're very resourceful, they're very kind of strong.
Like his wife.
Like his mother, like his wife,
mother, yeah.
like many of the women in his life. Because he kind of had to rely on that. And so it's not surprising
that he depicts it that way. Yeah.
Whereas Kubrick, and this goes into maybe my psychological mind, but
yeah.
Kubrick picked what you would expect in an abusive home. Right?
Yeah.
You have the alcoholic, and then you have the pleaser. You have the person who's kind of gonna make things happen, and oh, it's okay, honey, we can figure, and these things happen, and whatever you say, dear. You picked a person who you might find, and that's what you find. You find this weird place where they're right on this edge of abuse when they enter the hotel.
And then it breaks it open.
And then everything fissures. And so, to me, it made perfect sense with how they were presenting Jack Torrance for him to have found a wife who was, yes, dear, absolutely. What do we need to do? Oh,
right.
you dislocated his shoulder. These things happen.
Uh-huh.
Right?
No, that makes way more sense than I realized before. That's interesting.
And so I think that I don't think the character has as much depth as King's, but let's be honest.
In a movie, it's harder to do that. Yeah.
And you get some of that from Jack Torrance simply because Jack Nicholson is given way more opportunities to paint that character for us. From little sly things he says to the bartender in his imagination and all these things. But I think Shelley Duvall does as good as you can ask an actress to do.
Yeah.
But this is the difference in Jack. Because I could imagine a dozen actresses of that time period who could have played the wife, who could have played Wendy. But not one other actor could have played Jack Torrance as well. Right. And I think that's the difference.
I can't imagine any other actresses. But...
Certainly not. I can't imagine Robin Williams playing that. Although, again, deep fake that one.
That would be interesting.
That would be awesome.
Somebody did do a Jim Carrey deep fake of Jack Torrance.
It wouldn't be as good, but I can at least see it. He's kind of nuts anyways.
So were there anything in the movie you didn't like that just didn't work for you?
I think that some with the little boy got a little bit hard. I mean, I understand when you have a kid that young acting, you can only ask so much.
What scenes in particular didn't work for you with Danny?
I think there was just a lot of a lot of the scenes where he's seeing stuff, the shine of whatever's going on.
Yeah.
And the way he reacts just kind of fell a little flat. For the most part, I liked his interaction with the other actors.
Yeah.
I thought he did fine there. Although occasionally you'd be a little annoyed, but again, he's a little kid acting like a little kid, and
sure. The
if you're
finger
scared.
thing kind of annoyed me, to be honest. The only time there was one moment I did like when he started yelling out the red rum, that part was creepy and worked for me.
Yeah. The little, so there was times where he got he was a little flatter. And it is kind of hard. I get it. I mean, it's a kid.
There were some interesting scenes later that I still loved the scenes, but I was laughing my head off. It was the moments where Jack has the axe, man, and he's whacking down that wall, and he's going, I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow. Those scenes, I was cracking up.
And they're funny and scary at the same time.
Yeah.
And kudos, because that's how, and we've said this before, and maybe we've even said it here, but there's a connection that comedy and horror has.
Yeah.
Because it's focused on timing, it's focused on characters, it's focused on situation, and you add all these things together. And so the timing, it doesn't surprise me, even though we're kind of joking about Robin Williams. Robin Williams went on to play some really creepy...
Like Insomnia, that movie.
Yeah, and stuff like that. He actually plays some pretty good creepy characters. I just can't see him in this role. But that doesn't mean I couldn't see him in other horror roles.
Right.
Because he's got the timing, and he's got the ability to make the characters, and he's got the ability to read the situations. What he does in this, Jack Nicholson, is he's able to make it funny and horrifying at the same time.
And it got funnier the more I've watched the film.
Oh, yeah.
The first time I watched it, I was just kind of... Well, I was a young kid. But
well,
holy cow, what is this?
I think even, because I don't think I was too young when I watched this the first time. Because there was... I didn't watch it when I was very little. So whenever I saw it... But I don't think my mother had seen it. And it scared her.
Yeah.
She was an adult. I mean, I think most people who watch it the first time, there's not a lot of laughter.
No.
In the first watch, except for, kooky people like us.
Us warped ones. Warped ones, we get a correct kick out of it that way, but...
Actually, kind of an interesting note, when he has the axe and he's chopping, those were real doors. Those weren't fake doors. And the reason being is originally it was a fake door that was used. But Jack Nicholson, and I didn't know this, had actually spent time in the California National Guard as a firefighter. And so he went through the door too quick. Because he's getting the axe and he knows how to throw it. So he's passionate through it. So they had to switch out and get a real door so it would have the timing that Kubrick wanted.
Yeah.
But I actually love it. Also, the Here's Johnny, that really iconic that we even began with.
All improvised, huh?
Well, completely improvised. It was just said as he puts his face through. Kubrick hadn't been in America for a number of years at that point, and he didn't know the significance of that. And so he almost went with a different shot because he didn't know why that was. He's like, oh, whatever.
What's so funny about that? Yeah,
but I think there is something interesting because you see him as he lets go, and I think this is where the humor comes and all these things. You actually see him enjoying his descent into madness.
Oh, yeah.
As my grandpa would always tell me, going crazy is the problem. Once you're there, you're fine.
You know what? That's an interesting point. Maybe that's kind of why it gets me laughing, is I'm seeing his pleasure of going crazy and just losing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to the way he feels on edge all through the first of the film.
That's him trying to contain it.
That's, he's got this madness that he's trying to control, and then suddenly he can just let it go.
He's like, I'm just letting it go, man. Woo! Let it fly free. And then there's that pleasure.
Right.
And we kind of feel it, and that's why we're laughing our balls off.
That's right.
Watching him hack the door down.
We're just sitting there, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in. And we're laughing like a couple of madmen because he's like, yeah, I'm nuts. Let's just do this.
Let's dance, baby.
And so I do love that about there. But there is a character in both the book and the movie that they do a good job, although, like you said, hot and cold.
Yeah.
And that is the Overlook or the hotel itself. And that's what's interesting. In Stephen King's novel, it is a active character.
The hotel.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas in Kubrick's, it's almost it's a major character, but it's almost passive.
It's like a fossil of a character as opposed to the living, breathing character.
Yeah, and so it really it's kind of interesting how he does it. So Kubrick, everything's so detailed, but there's you have to be able to sense it. You have to have that shine. You have to have something that touches, or else it doesn't. Whereas in King's, there's an ominous feeling from the hotel constantly.
Right.
And I do think that is kind of an interesting difference between the way they take the films.
In terms of a visual thing, I remember that represents what you're talking about a little bit. In the book, I think I remember the carpet and the upstairs floors, it looked like jungle vines. Something active. You imagine creatures swinging at it and stuff. Whereas in the movie, it almost looks like bars.
Yeah.
Like you're in some kind of prison cell or something. Or a maze again.
Yeah.
The maze metaphor again.
But it's that hard, cold pattern.
Yes, exactly.
But the colors are quite warm for a lot of it, but it's sterile.
Yeah.
It feels empty.
Great word to describe it, sterile. There's like a slight sinister quality underneath the sterility.
Yeah. Whereas in King's, it's a monster.
There's a fire burning underneath it,
Right.
Bubbling going on.
The movie is almost, you could argue a haunted house.
Right.
Whereas with the book, it is a house that haunts people.
Right. The boiler is another example of that. It's building pressure to that explosion.
Yeah.
It's the pounding heart of the thing.
Yeah. Whereas in the movie, it's like, yeah, check. Moving on. So it is kind of interesting how each of them presents the characters.
Yeah, very interesting.
So here's the thing. Do you believe that the house is haunted, or do you believe that it was just madness, or do you believe it was some combination of the two?
Combination.
I think that's the safest bet.
Yeah.
I go with haunted for two major reasons. Besides the boy. You could argue with the boy because of the shining that he has, that he can kind of grasp memories. But you could argue that if he has that, he could do it anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, so fair enough. Can't say it's a haunted house just because of that. Here's my argument. One, as Wendy's running through at the very end, when she's getting that, she starts seeing scenes of things that have happened.
Very vivid things, too.
Which, by the way, is another conspiracy theory about his understanding of what the elites get up to. Only the very best people. Which is always fun. But, so she sees things, and while she's definitely lost it at that point, what she sees is not necessarily... You can't just say, oh, you see, they're all crazy now. Because she's at least conscious enough to want to leave. The other thing is, and I think this is where Kubrick kind of puts everyone in enigmatic, but it puts it over the edge for me, is at the very end when the photo shows.
Right.
And Jack Nicholson's in the photo.
Showing he was a part of its past.
Jack Torrance is now part of its past, present, future. It's overarching oneness. that is the Overlook. He is now one with it. And so because of that, I always go with, it drove him crazy. But what drove him crazy was...
So the craziness is the symptom of being haunted by these things.
Well, and I think they actually just do a good job discussing this in the movie, in the sense that not every caretaker goes nuts.
Right.
So it obviously touches only certain people. With the boy, we understand he has the shining, right? And I guess you could argue maybe so does his father, at least a little bit. But maybe it's the madness. Maybe they have to find a person who's just off enough that they can attune with the spirits in the house, or with the house itself.
Yeah.
And so maybe it was just Jack Nicholson is presented as barely holding it together as it is.
So they have to be mentally, emotionally unstable enough that they can latch on to, that they can fixate on something and cause them to fixate on something.
Right.
And control them and possess.
Yeah. And he even suggests it when he says when he first came there, he just felt like he was home. He could just be here.
Yeah.
It's like the house found a mind that's attuned to it.
Yep.
And it's like, now we can play.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that is a very interesting, I think it's a point. I think that if someone was just to say, which one is it? I'm like, there's a bad vibe. There's some bad something
juju
going on. Bad juju going at this place, and it hits minds. Certain minds get hit, and it takes on. But again, that's the difference between King's versus Kubrick's. Kubrick's is passive. It has to wait for the right mind to drive it into that madness. Has to wait. Should be also, this is just as a fun piece, this is probably, it's spinned off to one of the best Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episodes. Blood usually gets off on the second floor.
I don't know if I've seen that one, surprisingly. Sin, I must repent.
Repent? Repent! So, yeah,
what did you think of the musical score? Some people have complained a lot about that. I kind of like it. But...
I say this, because if I don't notice it, I usually consider it like the first time that I'm watching through, or if I haven't watched it for a while and I watch it again. If I don't notice it, I usually assume that's because they did a good job.
It blended into the background and involves you in the scene well enough.
Yeah, because sometimes you'll watch a movie and there'll be something and the music will be jarring.
Yeah, it distracts you from the story.
You know,
I see what you mean.
Or it'll be sarcastic. You know, like they'll have a terrible scene going on and bloodshed, and they'll be like, "What the world needs now is love." Sweet. And you're like, "I see what you did there, director." But if it doesn't stand out to me, it probably means that I thought they did a good job. The only scene that I really, right off the top of my head, remember the musical score is the scene of the woman in the bathtub.
Oh, okay.
Because
there's a heartbeat, I remember.
Yeah.
Boom, boom. Which I thought worked well.
Yeah, I thought worked really well for what it was. And it didn't take away from it. I will say I don't think it didn't. It's not a John Williams
score
anthem, you know. So whatever, it's fine.
You know what else worked great in that scene for me was the green walls. For some reason. Yeah. I don't know what it is. There was something very eerie, and I guess it made me think of a stain throughout the whole place or something.
Every color choice they made was great.
Yeah.
The gold room was creepy after the party, but that scene in the bathtub where somehow the bathtub just stands out, and then there's the woman in there, and then the change.
Yeah.
That is a creepy scene.
Yeah, absolutely. were very creepy in the book too. That was another shining moment in the novel that was very disturbing. In fact, King said he dreaded writing that scene.
I can see that.
In fact, he in his mind I think he said he was counting down the days he had to write it. Yeah. He was so terrified to write that scene.
I could see that. I convinced my sister. My sister wasn't very into horror, and I was reading The Shining, and she was asking if Stephen King was a good author. I said, yeah, Stephen King's a really good author. Is there a book I should start with? And I gave her The Shining. And she, for like a month, slept with the light on. High school student. It scared her that bad.
That makes sense. High school student, yeah. That young.
So she was mad as a hornet at me for a little while.
Speaking of the novel, I remember the first time I read it, I liked it, but it came across to me in a lot of ways very cartoonish.
Yeah?
Like a lot of the horror scenes did. But when I got older and I read it again in my 20s in college, and you're going through your financial troubles, it hit me in a deeper way. That part of that the characters were going through their own struggles in that way. I found it far scarier, the novel,
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, because you read, I think that's one of the disadvantages of being into horror since the time you were a little kid. There's advantages, don't get me wrong, but I think some of the trade-offs is there's some of the horror, there's some great horror that you just miss because it's based on adult situations. And I mean that in the Calvin and Hobbes sense when Calvin asks Hobbes, what's adult situation? He says, paying taxes and going to work and stuff, that sort of thing. And, no wonder it's for mature audiences. But there is something about that you start to miss when you read and you go through that as a kid, because you're sitting there, you're like, where's the big boot? Because you're worried about the monster.
Right.
You're a kid.
But the real horror was the characters and their reaction. Here's an interesting criticism Bret Easton Ellis once made of The Shining. He says that...
Book or movie?
The book.
Okay.
He said they were books that were pretending to be adult. That they were pretending to take on adult situations. What do you think of that? And that's more a paraphrase. I didn't directly quote his question. But
I'd say he's full of crap.
Okay.
I'm sure he's a delightful man. Don't get me wrong, but he's full of crap on this one. It really, because I look, I can see some of the point, because let's be honest, if I like King as a writer, I think he does an excellent job, but especially as you talk about his adult relations, he's kind of stuck in this weird, like, post-teen view of sex and some of these, those kind of relations and some of that. And so it can come off sometimes as you're reading it. Like, I don't know what it is, but every time he writes about sex, it sounds like he sounds suddenly like he's regressed to like a 19-year-old boy.
Interesting. Peter Straub, fellow author Peter Straub, said one time in an interview that Stevie hasn't discovered sex yet.
Okay, fair enough.
And then King had remarked, like, but what about my few kids here? Come on. I might be wrong about that last detail. But...
I guess he could have, regardless of whether he did. He could have said, but I got... And you're like, well, you hope they're yours. But so I can see somebody, if they just stuck at a few of those scenes, being like, oh, grow up, man.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Because I'm thinking of the books that I've gone through, and almost all that have some level of sexual relation. And I don't just mean the act of sex itself, but the kind of the
male and females interacting in regards to
he can
sex.
do okay.
Yeah.
But when it comes to sexual tension, there we go. Maybe like the tension of sexuality or the desire.
Okay.
he always seems like he suddenly regresses.
So it's like a constrained awkwardness
Yeah.
develops in his writing of it.
And it's like, even I think even scenes that worked really well, like when you're going through Pet Sematary and he's had that terrible day at work where the death and the all that stuff, and he comes home and in a way it's a great scene because
for character development. Right?
Yeah, it's his wife, like, I'm taking over the opportunity here to make sure that your mind is no longer on this and we're doing this. And in a way it's a great scene, but it's a 19-year-old's
fantasy.
Yeah, it's the fantasy of a and not to say that an adult, I can't think of an adult man who would say no to that.
Yeah.
But if it was just one scene and one thing, you'd go, hey, it works. But that's every scene. And I remember there's one scene when she's asleep in the book. Or no, he's asleep and she's there, and they discuss the aftermath.
Oh, this was in The Shining, right?
Yeah, the book.
She has the rueful feeling of his seed drying on her thighs.
Yeah, I was going to leave that in case you two got weird, but Deathground Rider always goes blue. That's
sorry, guys. I'm getting better at controlling it. I'm more. It's bridled at least now. I don't go ridiculously blue
anymore. It is
anymore.
bridled. Sometime I should tell you stories. But
we'll leave that for the 60 Minutes interviews later when we make it big. Coryphaeus, they'll have 60 minutes, and Coryphaeus tells the truth of what DeathGroundReviews says when the record button isn't pushed.
It'll be pretty boring. But I remember reading that, and as a teenager, you're like, "Oh, this is edgy."
That's what I thought the first time I read it. Yeah.
And then you read it when you're older, and you're like, "This is lame." And not even that. I mean, Dean Koontz. We'll use Dean Koontz for a minute here, who I will say is hit or miss for me.
I haven't read enough of his stuff to have a strong opinion.
He's a great writer, but his books are really hit or miss for me. There's some of them that are just amazing, and others I'm like, I just can't do it. But he often has sex scenes in his books, but he handles it in a very adult way. And the sexual relations, or even terrible scenes, where there's some level of rape or something going on. He can handle it in a very adult way. And so I can see somebody, if they're just talking about King's relation with sex as being, he's a boy trying to pretend in adult situations. I don't know why that is that he regresses, but he does. That said, when it comes to finances and stressors and the difficulties and
grief, he does a good job writing.
Amazing, and the loneliness or the feelings of loneliness within a marriage,
right?
Or any of those things. He's amazing.
Oh yeah.
And so, I think if you're just talking about an overall thing, sorry, I think he handles the adult situations better than most.
Yeah, you bet.
Just not the sex. I don't know why. But, hey, if you're going to have 50 and give him one nod...
Well, I'll say this. So I read the Playboy interview with Stephen King, and one of their questions was, are there any ghosts in your libido? Maybe there is. Maybe there is. And that's why every depiction is regressed like this.
Maybe.
Just joking. Just goofing around.
No, I think he does a really good job. I mean, I think that's why as you get older and read some of his stuff, it changes. Because anyone who's felt the pressure of being at the very edge of financial ruin will appreciate the stress that his character feels. Anyone who's felt like everything's relying on them and they're at a blank of what to do next, his characters, you'll be able to read and be like, I get it. So, I mean, to me, that's that.
Awesome. Well, what would we rate the movie The Shining? What's the final verdict? Out of 5.
You know, that's hard.
Very hard, yeah.
And not because it's not... I mean, because what we're really arguing is at what level between 4 and 5 are we? I mean, really. Let's be honest.
Absolutely.
It's like, okay, what level between 4 and 5? Dang.
I give it... I'll give it a solid 4 out of 5.
Solid 4?
Yeah.
What's lacking to you?
I guess I just did kind of like the hotter, boiling quality of the book better than the sterile, colder version of the movie.
That's
I really
fair.
did.
That's
I liked the book better in that way.
That is a fair assessment.
I still love the movie,
though.
That's why I'm giving it a 4 out of 5. It's still great in so many ways.
Yeah. I definitely... I'm switching after you gave me... You're like, 4 out of 5. I'm like, give it a... I think it's within the A range for me, if you were to grade the movie.
Oh, okay.
I do think that there are a few things that do come off a little bit...
Flat was the word you often used, yeah.
I think there were a number of scenes with the boy that definitely... And not just the boy's acting, but sometimes... Like, the doctor scene, I thought was important enough that you get the information, but I thought the doctor scene just drug.
Oh, yeah, they had pauses in the dialogue that you could drive 3 Mack trucks through.
Yeah, you were just like... Because when they had the same conversation with the cook, I can't remember the character's name, Scatman.
Oh, Halloran. Dick Halloran.
When they had those that kind of draw, like pull your teeth kind of interaction with him, it didn't feel as flat as when it was with the doctor.
Right. Like
he actually, maybe it was just how animated he was.
Well, in the scene and what they were talking about and their inside knowledge, you would have more hesitancy. You would try to be more careful with your words.
Well, right? Because he could catch in a lie a lot easier.
Yeah, exactly. So it made sense in the context of the scene, you know.
So, I definitely would say I think that scene fell flat. So is it an A minus? Is it like a 4.5 or 4.7 out of 5 for me? I actually like the cold.
Yeah. Do
I like it better than the hot? No. But I don't like it any less. I do think there's a few things. I think Kubrick did waste some of Shelley Duvall's potential. Part of that was because he was so erratic that it just threw Shelley completely out of whack.
Uh-huh.
Now I know that, and so it's like, oh, that makes sense. So I do think he wasted some of her potential. I think I would have loved to see a little more of the cook. I would have enjoyed seeing a little more interaction.
Yeah.
Maybe his interaction with Jack one-on-one a little bit before. But you're nitpicking.
You kind of have to at that point, yeah. And I agree with you. There are moments the cold element of the story did work for me.
And I think it's fine. I mean, if
the
a person...
bathtub scene.
Oh, yeah. I think if someone says, because that's a preference, whether you prefer the hot or the cold is simply a preference. I'm kind of sixes. I can enjoy both. But you're a very, even in your horror, it's very emotionally driven.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so I think I could see why you would prefer a hotter...
Right. Especially the rough draft, you know.
Yeah.
That's kind of, it's all emotion at that point, and then you cool off and you revise it and analyze it.
But no, I think this is I would definitely go. Yeah. I can't think of too many things to change. The problem is that he was so specific on anything that it either worked or it didn't. And so it's like, yeah, it worked. I can't think of anything I think that I would change or do. Oh no, that's not true, because I would have some interaction between the cook and Jack Torrance.
Right, and more of Shelley's characters.
Yeah. Okay, so that's our thought.
Well, cool. Well, hey guys, so yeah, that was a review of The Shining. And this is DeathGround Reviews. Please, everyone, like the video, share it. Please comment. Let us know your opinion on the movie and the book. Do you prefer the book over the movie or the movie over the book?
Tell us that we're geniuses or tell us that we're idiots.
Yes, if there's anything we said wrong, please correct us. We love dialogue and interaction. All those things help keep the beast of DeathGround Reviews alive. The monster that devours horror, suspense, and all those things, the fantastic. And so this has been a movie night with
Coryphaeus.
And we'll wish you a good night, guys.
Pleasant dreams.